WINS Toronto is a non-for-profit organization which champions and aims to promote inclusive and equitable policies in the Canadian workforce. We enable and develop the professional skills of those who might have experienced challenges based on their dimensions of diversity. We provide an embracing community of care and support for professionals to learn from each other and to expand their horizons through extended interactions with a professional network. WINS Toronto founder Hitu Sood. Hitu started WINS in December 1st of 2018. Through WINS Toronto, Hitu envisioned the creation of a community of support for diverse, multifaceted, and talented professionals to achieve greater success and break down these societal created barriers. To know more about Hitu, please visit her website at www.hituhrsolutions.com. This video is a recording of our public learning session on October 2020, conducted by Brian G. Bachand. Brian is the founder and CEO of Evolution, a global coaching company. Brian has been a strong advocate for immigrant inclusion and assisted new immigrants through his work as vice chairman of the board of Acces Employment. Brian is living proof that life is an evolution. His own journey from being a priest to then an executive in New York City, and now a founder of his own company, Evolution. His expertise is helping professional leaders and organizations evolve to be courageous and intentional. He is based out of Toronto and proud to be both an American and Canadian citizen. Finally, Brian believes when we ask the question, "What do I desire?" the truth will intuitively lead us forward. Prepare yourself to be challenged and inspired by Brian's session.
And the topic today is from fear to freedom, shifts that we can make. And you might be thinking, really? Tuesday at 5 o'clock, I want to talk about fear? Well, I can guarantee you some of the things we're going to speak about today and engage with can not only have an impact on you in this moment, but can have an impact on you in your personal life and professional life. Because fear is something that every single human being, no matter where we are, impacts all of us. And so I want to speak to you about 3 areas of fear, and they come from my own personal evolution. As Terry said in the introductory remarks there, my life has been an evolution. That's why I named the company Evolution. And I actually was a priest for 8 years in the United States, 8 years in Boston, 4 of those years in a parish, and then 4 of those years I was working for a cardinal who is connected with the Vatican. It was a very high-level role. But I came to a point in my own life that I started to feel that I wanted to move in a new direction. I wanted to take the gifts that I had, and I was feeling called to bring it in a new way. I could do that outside of being in the church. And, it's a big decision, and there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear that I was dealing with. What would my family think? What would parishioners think? How would I do financially? What kind of career would I move towards? Where would I go? And I have to be totally honest with you, I grappled with that fear for many, many months. And for anyone who's listening, when you've had fear and you keep it inside, it becomes like an all-day job, managing that fear, listening to it as it plays and replays and replays. But one of the first shifts, one of the very first things that helped me to move from fear to freedom, to make that courageous decision, to begin an entirely new path and career, was simply to say hello. Hello to the fear. It's a technique that is something we can incorporate every day. It's called the hello method. When fear comes knocking in your mind or your heart, you simply say, hello, fear. When there's anxiety that comes with it, you simply can say, hello, anxiety. And if there is something that's coming, there's an anger or frustration, you say, hello, frustration. By saying hello to it, You give yourself permission to honor how you're feeling in that moment. You give yourself permission to say, wow, I recognize the fear is there and I feel this way. But at the same time, you also give yourself the power to make a new decision, not to listen to that, and to choose and move in a different direction, to make a new decision to do something else, to listen to a podcast, to take other positive action. Fear can really be gripping. And it's important to say hello, but it doesn't mean you have to engage with it. When you look at the word fear, inside that word is the word ear, E-A-R. And it's kind of interesting. What fear does, it wants you to listen to it all day. Self-doubt, what's going to happen? Ooh, wonder if this might be the situation. But you and myself, we have the power to listen to how we are in that moment. But sometimes one of the first shifts that we can take is going to someone and say, this is what I'm fearful about, and to have someone listen to it. When we expose fear and we talk about it in the right place and bring it out to light, there's power that is immediately dissolved. Because sometimes fear can be really very illogical. And we live in these created worlds of, oh, this is going to happen and this can happen. But by listening and having someone else listen to us, it releases that power and it gives us the sense to move forward. It really is a small shift. It's a courageous shift, but it's one to take. Whether it's working with a professional to talk through that, a trusted friend, a spouse, a family member, that's really powerful because fear wants to isolate. And when you release that and you talk it out, it really opens up and helps you to see things in a new and powerful way. So next time it happens, remember this moment to say, hello, hello anxiety, hello fear, hello whatever it might be. And you have the power to make a decision to either listen or to go in another direction. The next thing I want to talk about is about fear in work, in the environments that we work in. So often right now, we're all working, most of us are working from home. So, it's kind of different. Our fear is sometimes just, oh, okay, do I want to sit in this room to take the Zoom call? Or do I want to work in the other room to take the Zoom call? Do I go for a coffee? Do I walk the dog? So it's a little bit different. But when we're in that work environment, there can still be fear, that can come through. In 2008, after I left the priesthood, I moved to New York City. So talk about making a courageous move, moving to one of the most competitive cities in the world. I just knew wow, this is where I wanted to be. I got there. And literally a few months after I got to New York City, I landed an amazing job, got a promotion within 6 months to become Director of Corporate Development at the American Cancer Society. All the companies I was working with were the Fortune 100 and 200 companies. And 2008 happened. 2008 is when Wall Street and the economy just went down. Overnight, it was absolutely paralyzing in New York City that so many companies were laying off hundreds and thousands of people. Every single day, all the people that I worked with and the companies I worked with were, being let go. I didn't know what was happening. I had a goal next to my name of a few $1,000,000 to bring in. It was kind of scary. There was a lot of fear attached. And, after a few months, we got some movement and things started to go. But then one night, on a Thursday around 5 o'clock, I got an email and it was sent from the COO of the company. And she simply said, is a mandatory meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the boardroom for people in my division. And, sometimes some leaders, they like to lead with fear. And I remember she came into the meeting and she didn't raise her voice. She wasn't angry, but she had a tone that created doubt, a tone that instilled a fear. For 2 hours on a Friday afternoon, she sat there and kept instilling how important our work was, But if there was an improvement, if we didn't make up the millions of dollars in revenue that were coming in, there would be consequences. This might happen. This could happen. There was a nice compliment here, but it was always followed up with a fearful tone. By the end of 2 hours on a Friday, everyone left there looking very pale, like we needed to go to a beach to have vitamin D back on our face. Everyone was nervous. And we left there drained, absolutely drained. But I remember by the time I got to my desk, I was there and it was an open seated area. All my colleagues were like, "Oh, wasn't that horrible? What was she saying?" You can imagine the whispers that were going around. And I remember at that moment, I just simply made a decision not to allow that fear of that meeting take away my joy and the joy that I wanted to have in my work and what I was doing. And I remember looking at my colleagues and said, well, it was kind of a crazy way to end the week, but I'm off to have a good weekend. And they kind of looked at me odd. But the gift of that was the following. I recognized the severity of the situation. I recognized that I knew what had to be done. But what it did is that fear that was in that room was trying to control. Fear is always about control. And when we allow fear to control us, it prevents us from being creative. It prevents us from looking at new and innovative ways to how to handle a situation. And so what I did over that weekend, instead of going into fear of looking at all my accounts that were closing, all the people that were leaving companies I no more had relationships with, I had an inspired thought on that Sunday afternoon. And it was very simple. There was a person I had met in a major company that worked in the diversity department. And I'd been learning and going to different events. And I was inspired to call him. And when I called him, I said, I'm just reaching out and I was just curious if there may be something we might be able to collaborate on some type of diversity and cancer research and, everything. Well, that led to an entirely new event for that year based on diversity for cancer research. And it brought in, because I realized there was all this untapped money at that time in organizations and companies that were just sitting there. And so what resulted was the biggest event of the year, the highest grossing financial event, all new partnerships from different companies. And it was actually held down by the Old World Trade Center. And it was held about 7 months later. And that day, that same woman that came in to instill fear into the group was there. And she just stood there and she said, I can't believe this happened. I never even knew this was all possible. And it resulted in actually the organization creating a new job. And it was simply because when you let fear control, you are letting it take away inspiration. And that's one of the great things that in our life, if you're in a work environment or you're working with someone and there's that fearful tone, the most important thing is to step back and to realize that that is what they're trying to project, but realize that there's an alternative out of it. Fear is about control. And if you're finding you're trying to control, you're actually blocking inspiration. And so that's just a very small shift that you can simply say, I need to stop looking at the negative of what I don't have or what's closing. And what do I have? What is possible? What is something I haven't thought of? And take inspired action or reaching out to someone or speaking with someone and being there. It really can have a tremendous impact in changing how things go. The third area that I would love to speak about today is fear around asking for help, around asking for assistance, around asking for anything that we may need because we feel how are people going to perceive us. I was recently speaking with a friend of mine who's very successful, has their own company, and said to me, I feel I have such a hard time. I'm so fearful about promoting my work because I feel that people are going to feel that I'm just looking, I want to get something from them. And there was a real fear around that of saying, like, if I do that, they're just thinking I want something, but that's really not it. But we, had to talk through that. And once we got through that, came to the understanding of why the individual was feeling that way. But really, fear can hold us back from asking something that we need because we think, what are people going to think? A great shift, if that's something you may be struggling with, of like, oh, I'm at work, and if I ask for assistance on this, they might think I'm not smart enough, or I'm not capable to know what to do. They're going to reflect bad on me. They brought me in. Things are already tight here. Here's a very simple way to move from fear into ask. So let's say you need assistance with something at work and you're fearful to ask, but there's someone on your team that you've always kind of admired that they're very good at what you need. The best way is to send them an email or to speak to them and simply say, I really appreciate the way that you handled this particular issue at meetings. Or I really appreciate the way you wrote that incredible at the presentation, and it just really helped bring the whole meeting to a new focus. And I'm kind of struggling on learning how to do that. Would you have time to meet? Always use the word appreciate. When you use appreciation, it changes the entire dynamic because you're honoring something that you really do see a value in another person. And it also gives you the courage to ask for what you need. And the person is actually going to be receiving that in a very different tone. And so appreciation is one of the greatest ways to overcome fear, especially when you need to ask someone for assistance, because it's a very positive approach, but it also gives great focus for where you are and what you're about. And it really can have a huge impact, especially if you're dealing with conflict too. Let's say you're dealing with someone at work or even personally, rather than going into a difficult kind of hostile sense, there's a great way to be able to say, I really appreciate when we're at different meetings, how you always tie in this point and that point, and it always sets us in the right direction. However, I'm kind of struggling on this in how we're working together. If you begin with appreciation, it changes the whole energy and the whole tone. And it moves from like kind of a defensiveness to an openness. Fear always wants us to be isolated. Fear always wants us to be held to ourselves. But these are some very small shifts that can help you and move towards that direction with an openness, with a sense of clarity and a sense of purpose. One of the biggest obstacles that I have heard from so many who are new to Canada, who are immigrants, and I'll use this one particular example, is they come here, they take the courageous step to bring either by themselves or their families, they move here and they get settled and they start applying for jobs and they go for interviews. And, sometimes they get interviewed for some really great opportunities. But the number one thing I've often heard is they say, Brian, after the end of the interview, they say, you're amazing. Your background is just so impressive where you've worked in the Middle East or wherever you've come from. However, you don't have Canadian experience. And, we just want someone who has some Canadian experience. So right away, what that does is it makes you feel inferior. It makes you feel less. It makes you feel, why did I come here? I thought this was supposed to be opening, and I probably could do this job and two other jobs that I'm applying for even better than they could do. So right away, all these emotions come. So this is my advice. You can't often change the system, but you can change how you present yourself in those meetings. and how you are not going to let the fear of someone who may not understand, oh, they've worked somewhere else, but they don't have Canadian experience, that limited mindset. So you have to take ownership. And this is what I tell people. And if you're someone that's struggled with this, or you're going through this, or I know if you're a newcomer to Canada, you have many friends that are probably going to have this topic. This is what I tell people. And it's really, it works. You need to bring it up before it's brought up to you. And it's not just about the newcomer question, it can also be other things. So for example, at an interview, they always ask you at the beginning, oh, can you share some, walk us through your resume, tell us briefly about yourself. That's the moment that you bring up with a smile and with confidence to say, although I have not had the opportunity yet to work officially in Canada, I know that my international background aligns me well for this role. And of all the countries I could have immigrated to, I chose here to make a difference. And I know that I will impact society here as we move forward. I can guarantee you, they're not going to know how to respond to that. And right away, you take away that fear of who's this person coming from outside? What is this person? Why are they applying for these roles? Is there something mysterious why they had to leave their country? And you take it away and you own it and say, I haven't worked here yet, but I know my background aligns for this and I'm willing to learn. And I could have picked anywhere, but I came here. Right away, it just absolutely diffuses that situation. And I think that's one of the most important things as immigrants is to be really upfront and own what people might be thinking. If you have an accent, to say, wow, I hope just own it right from the beginning. You may hear an accent. I'm originally from Brazil. And, you make it real. Bring them into the conversation rather than worried, oh, they didn't understand my answer, but probably because I didn't say the word correct. Bring it right up front. I have an accent. And if anything is unclear, please let me know right away. And no one will say anything. They'll love that self-assurance. So oftentimes it's about bringing it up before it's brought up to you. And it really brings that confidence. It takes practice. It's easier said than done, and I know that. But it really can shift and move you in a new direction by doing that. So there's two things I always say. So if you are considering moving from one industry to the next, or you want to, make a career change or, whatever it may be, especially if it's something different, two things. One, conscious change. You don't make it overnight. So I think that's number one. So many people think, oh, I have to uproot everything right away. No, like when I decided to leave, priesthood to go to New York City, it was done over a year. I made sure that I had a timeline. I made sure that I knew that I looked at finances. Okay, if I move from this to this, what's the financial, what do I have saved up? What kind of finances do I want to have in the next role? I worked with someone to look at my CV, my resume, to say what's transferable, what's easy to transfer, but where are some gaps? And how do I need to support that? How am I going to tell the story when I start looking for jobs? To say, they might say, well, you don't have any experience in this. What do I have that's relatable? How am I going to, take care of that? So I think it's really being conscious about what are some of the steps you need to take and putting a plan together. That's really important. So what that does right away, it reduces the stress of the whole transition. It actually makes it reasonable, saying, wow, okay, in 3 months, if I take care of these things, I will be in a really good spot. And you start taking inspired action. You start putting things in action, and that starts to build your confidence. You start to have conversations, and you also will start to know if it's the right decision. And pay attention to those things. If you're making the right decision, things will start to flow if you start taking some action. And if things aren't moving the direction, there's more resistance, things aren't happening, you need to be attentive to that as well. We often think, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. I'm talking to the wrong people. I'm doing the no. Sometimes it means maybe this isn't the right moment. Maybe I need to spend a little more time to look at that. So that is really, really important. And the second aspect is be open. Be open. And, it goes to the introductory remarks of the beginning of the session. I'm a firm believer when you ask the question, what do I desire? That's where the truth is. So ask yourself, what am I desiring by making this career move? Well, I'm desiring it because I just don't love what I'm doing anymore. And I'm really in love with this other area and I want to follow it. If you follow that desire, there's usually joy and there's truth there. And that's what's going to ignite the excitement and show you where you're going. It will never lead you astray. So consciousness, planning, being open, having a plan, and then also asking yourself, what do I desire in this? What's prompting the joy? How is this going to move forward? And if you're following that, all the other fears that can come along of, is this going to be able to support me financially? What's going to happen? What does this mean? It usually they'll start to fall into place and you'll get clarity around that because you're following what's bringing you joy. So those are the two important areas. So, right now during this time where there's so much shifts and change and uncertainty, many are feeling that way, about their job and what that means. So there's a couple things, and it kind of reiterates some of the conversation we had today, that if you're living in fear of losing your job, I think you also have to start focusing on what you do have. What resources do you have right now that are making you feel not fearful? So for example, you have this great opportunity of wins. You have a network here, to connect with others. Use your network is probably the most powerful aspect. If you're thinking that, oh my gosh, I think there may be a job loss at my work, start taking positive action of speaking to your network, of connecting with people here at WINS and letting them know, gee, I think I may start looking for another opportunity. Could I share my resume with you? I, start taking positive action applying for things. That can be very comforting, especially if you're uncertain, but you can still be focused on your work, but always be open moving towards the future. The hardest thing is when you are applying for positions, and this is probably the hardest thing. There is so much work that goes into when you're looking for your new job. Not just researching opportunities, applying for opportunities, but then preparing for interviews, more interviews. And there's nothing worse than after preparing and going for a few rounds of interviews and you get nothing. You get ghosted. How do you respond with that? Or you get simply a short email saying, thank you for all your time, but we've gone with another internal candidate or another candidate that better aligned with the position. It can be extremely frustrating and be really, really challenging. So it's important as you're going through that process to also make sure that you're taking care of yourself during that as well. And making sure that if you get a rejection, that you're not moving forward, that you ask for feedback, that you go back to them and say, I really thank you for your information. I understand your decision, but I really would value at least a brief 10-minute phone call. I would love some feedback on my interview process, because there may be something that they'll share with you that will either be affirming to help you keep moving forward, or maybe an insight that you have a blind spot to. That can be really helpful. So that's one way to manage that. The other aspect too is to, if you get ghosted, this is something that drives me insane, and I'm super passionate about it. I actually wrote an article for anyone who's listening. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, it's on my feature section, and it's about if you've been ghosted, how to handle it. What are positive steps you take to go back? And it really works, because you need to take the power back. And you need to let them know kind of, that you were disappointed or you like feedback, etc. Because that's hard. And I think it's really important to make sure you have a plan. Just like if you're looking to make a career change, have a plan when you're going through a job process of making sure you're taking care of yourself mentally, with wellness, with exercise, and also just being open to the possibilities of the people that you will meet. That will take away a lot of anxiety. That when you're networking, instead of saying, I hope this person helps me, just approach it as, I'm looking for a great conversation here, and see where it goes. There's less pressure and there's more openness. So I think it's really important to build that relationship quite strong, even outside of the regular schedule meetings, to do some touch points, to let that person know a little bit about some of the things that you're doing and what you're involved in. So I think that's a very important relationship. You also have a right to ask as you move through, whenever the contract is ending a couple months before, to simply say, I know this is some further time out. Just very curious if there might be any update on the contract. If there might be openness as we move forward. To extending the contract or what the status is. I realize you may not be able to give an answer right now, but if there's any insight you're able to give as we move through, it'd be most welcome. You have a right to ask that. You're not an indentured servant that, oh, I hope they come back, da da. Again, take the appreciation method. You go to your boss and say, I really appreciate how you meet with us every week or bi-weekly, and it's been so informative. And if there's ever a possibility to kind of know the status of if there's opportunity for extension of the contract or where we're at, really welcome to hear from that as well, because you've always been you've always communicated well, and we really appreciate that. Take that approach. They might even be more open to giving more information. So that's kind of the best way to do it. I really would say put a lot of emphasis on building that relationship and letting them know what you're doing. Maybe be a little more upfront about the things you're working on, what you've enjoyed. Those are really important things. I'm going to leave you with one more piece too, and this applies to anybody in different things. If you really want to set yourself apart, if you're applying for a position, or even for your situation being on the team right now, there's a great website called Loom, LOOM.com, where you can do free videos. And what I suggest is if you're applying for a job, when you send your resume, send a brief video just introducing yourself, just a minute, no more, 2 minutes max, just saying, I just want to introduce myself, here's my resume, etc. But it's also something you could do with your boss. And this might also remind them that it's a person, not just information they're getting. Send them a quick message, a 1-minute video message, and just simply say, hi, you know what? I thought I'd do something different today. Here are the top 3 things I just want to update you on. And here's the information. Look forward to hearing from you. It can set you apart, and it shows you're innovative. It shows that you're using technology. It also shows you're a human person, and not just to get stuck behind information that you're getting, especially through email after email after email. But by seeing that personal contact, it brings it alive a little bit more. Even myself, I didn't come from that far, right? I came from New York City, and there was an opportunity to come here. But I'll be quite honest with you, I have not traveled from as far as so many of you had, language backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, diversity of race, etc. But there's a bias even against Brian Bachand, who came from New York City. So, and let me just tell you, so I used to always hear, and I was told this, my boss one time said to me, Brian, when you go to meet with the vice president, you need to be aware of you're very American in your approach, and they're very Canadian, and they're not going to like that, how you approach something. Or, there was a bias that, with the American that comes in, they're going to do this, or they're going to react a certain way. And I think, we have to adapt a little bit. So I think that's one thing you have to be aware of, that all of us are here. We're here for a reason. We have to adapt. But we don't have to sell ourselves or push ourselves down and take away. That diversity is powerful. My my work from New York and who I am is actually a gift. Your gift from whatever culture you come from and the background and the ethnic background is a gift, and it enriches a team. But you have to make sure to know that it can blend in, and to be sensitive to that. And your role is not to change their mind and where they're at. Your role and my role is simply to be present, to be authentic, and to be open. And if they mistake that and they push, you think, oh, they didn't get it because of this and that, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're here because we chose to be here. And we simply have to be open, we have to present our best selves, and we have to be authentic to who we are. And that is the joy of diversity when that's brought in. And if it's an environment that's just totally hostile on that, or you know they're not going to want that, then you don't want to work there. It's not the right place. You make a decision to move forward. Appreciate that you have other options. I say, I'm so inspired by what you created. And I think this is wonderful. And I think there's power that you're all here. And I'm so passionate about helping newcomers. As I'm going to be chair of the board of Acces starting in April. And I know so many of the obstacles, and I believe in the power of it. So please connect with me. If I can ever be of service, don't hesitate. And it's a real gift to be with you tonight. So thank you. I really mean it. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Remember to like and share.